Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I was asked to speak about Atlas Shrugged and Ayn Rand, so I'm going to do that. According to last night, of course, only one person in here has actually read the book, which makes it interesting, but I think I'm going to talk about her ideas, what the book is about. How many of you even know what the book is about? One of the first, okay. Well, let me just say, without destroying the story for you, because it is an interesting book to read. Once you get started, you'll have trouble putting it down, even if it is daunting in its size. It's a good story. But basically, it's about the destruction of the world through government control of the economy, mostly focused in the United States, and what happens to the U.S. economy as the government takes more and more control of the economy, which is probably why it was recommended for this particular group. So I'm going to say some things about some of the ideas that you find in the book, and some things about the book, and a couple things about Rand herself. I first read the book when I was 16 years old, many years ago, and had a profound impression on me. In fact, probably affected what I ended up doing with my life, which was to go into philosophy and teach philosophy for 20 years before I went to the organization I'm now with. So the book had a big impact on what I do and the ideas I have, and hopefully you'll find at least some of the things about it interesting. But what I'm going to do is try to present to you some of the ideas that you find in the book. It has been and still is a very controversial book, so we'll see what you think of the ideas, and hopefully during the question and answer period we will have a chance to discuss, debate, or whatever you want to do with this. I'll explain my title in a second. Let me just move on. In a nonfiction work, Rand wrote this statement. She said, "The free market is a continuous process and cannot be held still, an upward process that demands the best of every man and rewards him accordingly." That's her view of capitalism. That's what she argues for. You'll notice to some extent that it's not really an economic statement at all, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Rand, as far as I could tell, when I reread the entire book before coming here, only uses the word markets once in about 1,200 pages. So it's interesting that she does not come at capitalism from an economic perspective at all, and we can talk about that too as we go on. I thought I'd give you a brief biography of Rand. She was born in 1905 as Alice Rosenbaum in Russia. And she was, of course, by that account, a teenager when the Bolshevik Revolution and other things happened in the Soviet Union. Obviously, like anybody would be, was very impressed by that, and actually tried to get out. So she emigrated to the United States in 1926 and was enamored of American movies. So even though a relative in Chicago is the one that brought her to the U.S., she actually went to Hollywood almost immediately and started working in the movie industry and on films. I mentioned here that she gets married to somebody in Hollywood in 1929, an extra, somebody who also worked in films at the time, and then becomes a U.S. citizen in 1931. I thought I would list her fiction works, main ones anyway. In 1935, she published a play called The Night of January 16th, which was actually had a run on Broadway and was reasonably successful. And every now and then it still gets performed. It's something that you can buy. Her first novel was We the Living in 1936. It's actually quite a good novel, and there's actually quite a good Italian film made of it. Well, I think that film was made in the 50s, was lost, and has been recovered. No?
1930s.
Oh, it was made in the 30s, okay, yeah. And then was lost until, what, a decade ago or so, and then was rediscovered, remastered, and you can actually find the film The first significant novel, the one that gave her her reputation, was The Fountainhead in 1943, about an architect, very similar value system to what you find in Atlas Shrugged. And then in 1957, Atlas Shrugged was published and was her last fictional work. She wrote some nonfiction works. These are the main ones. For the New Intellectual in 1960, which is essentially a book of compilations of passages from her writing in The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. So there's nothing really new there. The Virtue of Selfishness in 1964. Ayn Rand defends the kind of selfishness, which is why she's so controversial. And we can talk about that as we go on. I'll have a couple things to say about that as well. Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal in 1966, so you can see where I've got my title for this talk from. I just took it from her nonfiction book. You actually have two essays in front of you, or passed out last night, one called Man's Rights, the other one, The Nature of Government. Both of those come from this book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. I noticed, however, that they don't even tell you where those essays came from in what you have in front of you, but that's where they did come from. I think there's an essay in there called What is Capitalism, which I think is a terrific essay. If you ever have a chance to read it, I think it's one of the best essays ever written on what capitalism is. So it's certainly a book worth getting. Romantic Manifesto is about her philosophy of art and fiction writing. The New Left, Anti-Industrial Revolution, you can guess from the title what that's about. And then finally, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. She called herself, her philosophy, Objectivism, and epistemology is the study of theory of knowledge. Thought I'd say something about the significance of Atlas Shrugged. It's been a bestseller ever since it was published. There are almost no books that qualify that way. A bestseller in the United States is defined as a book that sells 100,000 copies a year. And ever since 1957, it has been a bestseller. At the moment, the sales of this book are, again, skyrocketing much more than even bestseller class. There was a Library of Congress. Library of Congress is a central library in the U.S. survey done of important books, and Atlas Shrugged ranks second behind the Bible in terms of influence on people in the U.S., which is in 1991, a pretty amazing statement about a book. It launched, in many respects, the modern libertarian movement, certainly in the U.S. There was even a book written entitled, it usually begins with Ayn Rand. There are a number of factors that contributed to the libertarian movement, but Rand certainly in the 60s was a major force in getting people like myself interested in libertarian ideas and ideas of liberty. There are plenty of others as well. It's widely discussed on the web today, quite a bit of discussion you can find on the web. And I guess if we're in Malaysia talking about it, it's a book that has at least some influence. I thought I'd pull this little graph out for you. This is from Amazon.com, which basically what this shows you is what the sales of the book have done on Amazon. The higher the number is, actually the lower the number, 30 means it stands like at 30th on the list of top sellers at Amazon. What you notice about this graph is that whenever the government did something like subprime, fiscal stimulus, bank bailouts, the sales of Atlas Shrugged shot up because government intervention in the economy, as I said to you, is what this book is about in some ways. So every time the government would do something in the U.S., people start buying Atlas Shrugged again, and then go down, and then something else would happen, instead buying again, and so forth. So it's interesting to see that impact of the book. I thought I'd say something about what I'm calling the foundations of capitalism as you find it discussed in this book, and we could talk about some of these ideas.